Cody, welcome. Haven't seen you before.
How's it going? Yeah, I'm working with Graven. We're doing HackFS right now, so super interested in
Awesome.
ceramic.
Cool. Yeah. Can you guys remind me what you're working on again?
Yeah, we're working on what's called GeoWeb. So like at a high technical level, we're basically mapping real world plots of land to some sort of piece of digital content. So we're interested in maybe that content being a ceramic document, among other things. So that's kind of
Awesome. I remember that post now coming in the Discord.
Cool.
We can kick it off in like a minute. Maybe some people will trickle in throughout, but we keep these pretty informal. So part of, we can answer any questions you guys might have as you've been building. Also, if there's just extra time, we have a bunch of random things related to future protocol improvements that we could talk about here. So you can kind of use the time however we want. We don't need the full hour if we don't need it, but it's just here in case. Okay, let me check something.
How's it like doing like a month-long hackathon? I haven't done that.
Yeah, it's been interesting.
You guys feel about that?
Yeah.
Cody and I knew each other, and then we had two other people. We just kind of put out the idea, and two people joined, and one's in Seoul, one's in India. So we have a pretty, the time zones are tough, and like getting people up to speed, because Cody and I have been talking about the idea for months now. So it's been a little disjointed, but it's still fun. I mean, it's good to just do something. I don't think we're going to hit all of our goals, but oh well.
Says
Yeah, definitely.
Ever.
Fair enough.
It definitely doesn't have that, element of you only have a weekend, shove in all this work and build something. Like it's been hard to actually commit as much time as a usual hackathon, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, Anmol.
Hey, hi. Sorry about the video.
Okay, cool. I mean, so we have the time. There's, like I said, there's obviously things we can talk about, but like, are there any questions or thoughts you guys have as you've been considering working with ceramic, or where's the project at? For GeoWeb, at least.
Cody, do you have any specific question? To be honest, I'm not even a developer, so I'm kind of learning as I go, more on the product side. But really, I think there hopefully is a fit there. We're kind of not ready. We don't know what we don't know, or at least in my case, I don't know what I don't know. So we're just kind of hanging out in the background, trying to absorb information and see where it can go, unless Cody has specifics.
Yeah, I don't have anything super specific, but I think where I'm at right now is trying to learn like processes and how you guys do CIPs and different repos you have and where documentation is and things like that. That's kind of where I'm at. So no specific technical questions right now. But
How are you thinking about like? So you mentioned you wanted to put like some of the geodata in ceramic. Like what part of it lives elsewhere, or like what is it that you see like ceramic being used for there?
yeah, I think what's really intriguing is integration with identity and DIDs or 3IDs, as well as this concept of an owner of a document. I think conceptually it maps pretty well with what we're trying to do, because essentially you can imagine like there's a document that's tied to every physical piece of land, and that document is owned by somebody, and we want that ownership to be represented on a blockchain. So I think conceptually it really is like very analogous and maps really well. And also, I think these documents need to be very mutable, and sometimes like it should be a little quicker to update. Like we don't want every single update someone to have to pay gas or to have to go to the blockchain. So I think this concept, from what I understand of like periodic blockchain anchors, is I think maps really well to what we're thinking about. But yeah, we looked into the tile doc type. I think would fit most of our use cases, just having a plain JSON document. But like I mentioned in Discord, we do have questions about this whole schemas and like how that fits in, and whether like schemas that we make should be like CIPs that are part of Ceramic, or if that's like a whole nother layer. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so Yanko is actually implementing like the schema support right now, but the way it's kind of meant to work is that you can define a schema in a tile document as well. So if you define that with the JSON schema and put that into tile, then in your new document that is supposed to conform to that schema, you can just set the schema to the schema document that you define. And you can do that, like you can create those schema documents without any like on your own, like without telling anyone about it. You could also like create a CIP this is like a standard schema that you want people to use and be aware of. So that you could just do that for like visibility. And like in the future, we're gonna have like a more kind of broad thing called like the Ceramic Explorer, where you can just like browse different schemas and different documents that people have created.
Okay, interesting. Cool.
That's actually what I was going to ask about. Schemas are the most interesting thing that I think about for Ceramic, but making them visible to the applications that are going to be using them, because the hope is to have, if I understand it correctly, schemas that are visible and like make it possible for different applications to interact with each other. So they have to be visible and like searchable, queryable in some way. So it sounds like that has already been thought of.
Yeah, I mean, like basically by storing them on Ceramic, they become sort of like public in that way. So if you're just like looking at a document, you can see what its schema is and at least know how the data will be returned when you're designing your application to consume that data. But yeah, on sort of like the writing side, you can also enforce that schema when you're adding content. So it sort of like works on both ends of both like enforcing that the document conforms to a schema, and then enables others to view that schema when they're thinking about designing how to interpret the data.
There's one more interesting thing with schemas represented like Ceramic documents, since you can utilize versioning on Ceramic as well. So if you attach a schema and provide the document ID, the Ceramic ID, right, for the specific schema, and if you update the schema, and when that's after the anchoring, you will actually get a new version of the schema. So you can actually pinpoint the versions of schemas that you used against data that you stored. So that's one more thing.
Yeah. And we broadly like recommend that, if you want to tie to the explicit version of the schema, so let's say like, whatever schema you're going to use on GeoWeb, for example, to represent like the information about a location, you can reference that explicit version in the tiles. And so that way, if you update the schema, those tiles will use the old version, or you can just map the straight doc ID and then it automatically conforms to the newest version. That sort of like gives optionality in that, if you're really just adding properties to the schema, then you can automatically get them, but sort of when you change properties, you have the backwards compatibility issue. And so that's always why you might want to reference an explicit version. Like adding is easy because you could just keep pulling in the new ones, but if you start changing things, then that's where versions are helpful.
So there's no, it's just like the ceramic document for a schema is just like the latest version of the schema. There's no like, because I know someone was posting like the, I forget what it's called, HyperCore or one of those, where they're talking about ways to migrate between schemas. There's nothing like that for ceramic schemas. It's just like pointing to the latest version, and then you can use whatever version in the past.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, so what they're doing is basically like also including like a function that like maps to the schema, and like I can see that like that's something that would be possible to build on top of ceramic, but it's not like native to the protocol. But I can imagine like maybe in the future, since you define the schema in a document, you might be able to like define the schema and like the migration function. But it's always like a thing you need to consider if you want to like how you want to distribute that code. Because if you like just in a document just execute some code, then that could do something malicious. You want to be careful there. But I think in the future we'll be able to like do migrations as part of like updating the document like automatically. Because we have been doing like some initial thinking, and actually someone in the community like suggested a doc type that like is scriptable. So basically, instead of having that be like do a specific thing, you can actually script the state transition function. So you can have that do like calculations or whatever. So things like that are possible, but they require like a much stricter like security considerations.
Welcome, John. And so, Cody, I know you were just asking about CIPs and sort of the documentation and stuff like that. Are there any specific questions that you have as you've been looking around, or what's most helpful?
Yeah, I guess my questions are mainly like what qualifies as a CIP versus what is out of band, because there's a lot of CIPs in there, and I guess most of them are made by core developers. I'm not really sure like what, you know, how the community, you know, what the process is for community members to submit CIPs, or what should be a CIP and what shouldn't be a CIP. Yeah.
Yep, let me just pull this up. So, cool, you can see my browser, right? Yeah. So basically, the whole process for CIPs is like roughly defined in just the README. It's not too strict or laborious, hopefully. But basically anyone can submit CIPs, and they're used for a variety of things. Like if you're familiar at all with the way that Ethereum and some other open source projects have done it, there's categories. So there's broad categories, and then there's like, or types, and then there's categories. And so types are really like, is it a core CIP, which would be, I guess first, is it a standards, meta, or informational? Most will really fall into the standards track, because meta is just like about the CIP process or about governance, and informational is just if you want to make something brought to the community's attention. So most will be standards, and within standards you have a couple categories, and I'll jump down here. So categories, standards, meta, or informational, most will really be standards. And then within standards, you have types. So if it's a type core CIP, it's really a CIP that touches the core protocol. So basically like how doc types are handled in the protocol, not the doc types themselves, for example. So that they're, you know, these are like core protocol things. Networking is syncing and things related to the networking layer. There's a typo that I have to fix. Interface is like the JavaScript interface that we've recently refactored. and for clients, and RFCs are basically everything else. So RFCs are just like implementation use case type stuff. And so most of the CIPs that you'll see in there are RFC. And so an example would be if you wanted to create a schema for like a GeoWeb document, you might just create a CIP for that if you wanted community visibility and potentially like convergence around that schema for something. But if it's only a schema that you ever only imagine your application using, then you can just write it yourself and not make a CIP. So CIPs are really, especially the RFC category or RFC type, are really about community visibility and sort of, you know, like shepherding towards a standard for something, which is sort of all the identity related work. So most of the CIPs you see in there today are related to this identity index protocol and sort of sub children of that and various things related to identity. That's kind of why we did and created Ceramic in the first place, was to do a, you know, user-centric decentralized identity system. So those are all RFCs. So it really is up to you, depending on what you imagine the use for the data created by this application to be. Is that like any more questions on that, or like what's the, yeah.
No, yeah, that helps a lot. Cool, thanks for going through that.
Yeah,
Sounds like
then,
RFCs are definitely the one I'm most thinking about.
yeah, and like, and once they go through, like, so you create an issue, that's where you see all the CIPs now. And once they go through, like, you know, the process, they go to last call, and then there's some in here that are final. So final really means it got merged as a PR, and once they're done, they end up in the CIPs repo. So they'll be here for people to use. And we're in the process of creating an index for CIPs so people can search, right? So this is really providing like visibility into use cases and ways people are using Ceramic. So the things you're creating have a higher chance of being reused and built upon as sort of like composable block. Yeah, so if that's interesting, feel free to submit them. We'd love more contributions there. It's mostly been us just making all the thinking that we have transparent for now, but I imagine over time that those will be coming from a lot of places. And, you know, even like at the RFC level, you'll have things like doc types. So because doc types aren't defined in the protocol, they're, you know, you can choose to support whichever doc types in your node you want. They're really at the RFC layer as well. So RFC is everything from doc types to schemas to documents that use a doc type in a schema to do something else and sort of specify what tags you apply to documents. So it can be more indexable and contextualized. So it kind of varies. Cool. Sorry, how else can we be helpful? Thinking through, do you guys have a good idea of, so when you said you like the concept of documents being owned by DIDs in your conceptualization of the platform, is if a document's attached to a location, who would you want to be able to update that document?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of gets to the core. Is the idea is there is some registry of people that own the digital rights to that land essentially. So we've talked about, you know, Graven can talk more about this, but we've talked about basically whoever owns the physical land would have like first right to buy the rights for the digital content for that land. But essentially the idea is, you know, eventually anyone, you know, it could be treated like an NFT. Anyone could buy or sell the digital version of the land, and then the owner of that land would be the owner of the Ceramic document. Is essentially how it would be.
This is Joel. You might want to share something about the NFT. It won't be ready for this hackathon, but we have this concept of documents owned by NFTs, which really like
somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. So basically, right now, tiles are owned by use the DID, And the thing with the way ceramic works is that there isn't really you can kind of have things happen and you know like which things happen first, but there isn't really any kind of double spend protection. So you can't build things like a cryptocurrency in a ceramic document, or and that makes it hard to like transfer documents. Like you can transfer it, but then I might have created like an update earlier that I never published that kind of brings it back to me, my ownership. So that's fine though for identities where an identity should really only be like for one individual. So like if I sell my identity, the person who buys it can't be sure that I actually have a copy and then can just retrieve it back. So that's like a protection for kind of the identity layer. But for your use case, you really want to be able to like transfer who can edit the document. And we thought about this like some while back, and the idea we came up with is like, is that instead of setting the owner of the document to be a DID, we set the owner to be just an NFT. And then whoever can prove that their address that owns the NFT is linked to their DID, so the DID that owns the NFT in some way, is able to update the document. And then you kind of outsource the double spend protection to whichever blockchain the NFT lives on. And then you can just like allow the current owner to update the document. It requires some changes to like how the core ceramic protocol works. So it's just like an upgrade that we'll make later.
Is this taken care by the core protocol, or specific doc types have to implement these checks, as in who can update the document?
Yeah, so this should be implemented by the core protocol, and then any document type, you just specify like, hey, I want this NFT. And so we've been working with the chain agnostic improvement proposals. So that's like a repo and an organization that works with like just creating chain agnostic definitions of blockchains, of accounts on blockchains. And so we're already using the kind of blockchain agnostic accounts specification, but now recently it was also merged like a blockchain agnostic asset specification. So you can specify any asset on any blockchain. So that's something that we use or will use with this NFT ownership type thing. So you specify the chain agnostic NFT identifier as the owner of the document.
Yeah, and sorry, please go ahead.
No, will you?
Yes, I had a basic question. As in case of ceramic network, the documents are pinned on IPFS, right? So can those documents be fetched from a public IPFS gateway or any public IPFS node?
Yeah, they should be able to be fetched from like any IPFS node. The thing you have to be aware of though is like so a ceramic document, you kind of, the document ID is the Genesis record. So if you only fetch like the Genesis record from an IPFS node, you only get the first record. And then in order to get the latest update, you need to use IPFS PubSub. So like ask the network in a specific PubSub topic, hey, what's the latest head of this particular document? And if someone else is like actively pinning this document, they will reply with the latest state of that document. And then you can just sync all of the records.
It's theoretically possible for me to spin up a ceramic node on my system, and then, if I'm interested in particular documents, then I can ask for those documents to sync automatically.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Kind of circle back. I'm going to ask maybe a dumb question, but so we were thinking about this in our architecture. It's like we have this registry that it has the digital land, it has an owner, and then kind of following the mode of ENS where they have resolver contracts. I'm not sure if you've seen that. So it's 2 smart contracts. With this NFT ownership of a ceramic document, we could actually just go straight to have our single smart contract that does the registry, and then a ceramic doc can be owned by that NFT and not have to rely on a second resolver smart contract. This would replace that potentially.
Yeah, you might need to like, so in some cases you might be able to like deterministically from the NFT derive the document ID. In all cases, that's not possible. So that's something we should look into. But if that's not possible, you could also like in the NFT kind of specify which is the, like maybe when you create the NFT, you also create the document for that NFT or something like that. But yeah, that might be something that we need to like look more in detail on. But in general, yeah, that sounds like a good approach. So Josh, you asked, would ownership of schemas also be moved to NFTs? What about the need for multiple users to come to consensus? Would DAO make sense as an owner in this case, or would an NFT be still applicable? Okay, so this is a great question and it touches a bunch of different things. So since schemas are defined as tiles, yeah, you can also have them be owned by an NFT. And then the question of like multi-owner documents is interesting. And yeah, you can have that. And then basically you need to collect signatures from all of the participants in that document. So if there are 2 owners, you need to, both of them need to sign it. If there are 3 owners, all 3 of them need to sign it. So that's like how the multi-owner document works like. And then for like a DAO owned document, yeah, that's also possible, but requires kind of like a new record type in Ceramic. So right now how Ceramic works is that when you make an update to a document, you sign the kind of patch or like the update to the document. And then there's an anchor added on top, an anchor record added on top of that. But with a DAO, you want to do something different. Basically, you want to have like a vote pass where you say like, hey, yeah, this update that we agreed on is actually valid. And then we can create some kind of DAO vote outcome record. That's basically both including, because you don't need to anchor it if it's like an outcome of a DAO vote, because that's already on chain. So that could be used to create a DAD for a DAO, or it could be used to like make an update to a specific document. I can imagine also like you have a DAO that like votes on something and that updates like a bunch of different Ceramic documents. All of those kind of are possible. And we kind of want to collaborate more closely with multiple DAOs to kind of see which one of those makes the most sense. And another case might be to like have a DAO create a DAD document and then kind of delegate to some of its users as like, I think the Moloch people now call that minions. So basically have some people that are like delegates of the DAO to do something. So something like that would also be interesting. So then you basically have the DAO be like the master DAD, and then they assign rights to like the DADs of some of their users to do things on their behalf.
So in both cases, you have like the pure DAO driven voting record, and then other ways you have just like bestowed delegates that can do things. And probably like you'll want different capabilities for a different set of the DAO's documents.
Yeah, exactly. Like some things, like if you have like a quite large DAO that have a lot of things at stake, you might not want just like one person to be able to like update the visual profile or something like that of that DAO. Might be something you want to pass with like a vote or like a sub delegate vote or something like that. So there will probably like be many interesting ways to kind of put that together.
But I think Josh, your question about schemas being owned by NFTs, it depends on what the guarantees of each schema are, because I imagine the schema is, owned by some organization like schema.org or something, right? And they're publishing like an official schema. You want to know it's them. But in some ways, making documents owned by NFTs future-proofs them, which, if it's an app-defined schema and that app gets sold or transfers ownership in some way, then you'll want both like the app DID and the documents it controls to be owned by something that can also be transferred. And so, for user identity and user-owned documents, probably like don't want that transferability in the same way, but for things like organizations and things of that nature, transferability is probably more desirable. Again, depends on the guarantees that the app is making to its users. Schwartz, I know you're coming in with a ton of questions.
Yeah. I was just waiting for a good time to start giving some feedback, at least.
Yeah, that's great.
So I know you were looking for like, what's your first impression of walking into this? And I've heard, I've heard you talk about this, at a couple of talks, but I like really for a while didn't understand enough about decentralized identity in general and like all the moving parts to be able to like consume that in a meaningful way. So this was my first time really like digging in. So first, like for me, I think one of the best things that you've done so far is you've just done a really good job like cultivating an appetite for using these tools. When I started reading more about what you are talking about DIDs and the doc types and schemas and all the system that you're putting together, it just makes it's really cool, and like it drives me to want to use it. Not just like, I mean, we're all like friends, but when I'm thinking about using this, that has like nothing to do with this. It's like I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is the thing that I was gonna try and do for my own project anyways. So like makes sense for me to start here. So that was really good. One of the hard parts for me, definitely at the beginning and still now, is really figuring out like what's in and what's out of Ceramic, because I think, and it's really hard too, because parts of things that are considered in are being like actively developed or on the roadmap. So it's even harder to understand like, okay, wait, is this something that is going to be handled for me, or do I need to handle this, or is there a library that 3box is using that is doing the thing that I needed to do, but it's just not going to live in Ceramic. So I like find myself coming back to that point. So, and I there could be things that I just haven't seen that are like your roadmap in tandem with how 3box is planning to consume Ceramic, and then distinguishing like these things are like very core to 3box, and if you were going to implement something that used Ceramic, you might not need these things. These things are like core to Ceramic, and if you want to use Ceramic, this will be taken care of. And then there's some other sort of like floating things that are neither core to 3box nor core to Ceramic, but using them might make your job easier. Because I know like one of the things that's confused me a little bit is the fact that, so on the site it talks about Ceramic. There was a specific sentence that I found that I thought was a good example. Ceramic's infrastructure allows participants to create signed tamper-proof documents, but like as far as I can see now, I don't think Ceramic is actually creating the signatures, or that like something about that, or dealing with keys, or these parts that I take me a little bit to dig through, and a lot of that is probably my fault because I'm just like pretty new to all this. But I think that would help to see kind of the big picture of how, and I think showing how 3box consumes Ceramic might be a good place to start there. And that kind of leads to a second piece, is that just in the way that I and the people that I work with like to build on these newer technologies. Like, I really like to be cautious and think about, okay, what's the lightest integration that I can start with that is future proof in the sense that I can move to a heavier integration or like a more less superficial when the certain parts of the system become more stable over time. So like, I'd like to know, like, inevitably there are going to be breaking changes introduced, which is totally fine. And I'd love to be a part of like understanding where those are going to occur. So, and also understand what things can I do now in my system to protect me against those things, to make those upgrades super simple. And in the process of upgrading, also create deeper integrations. So I'd love to see like, hey, this is like a safe way to consume ceramic for the next 5 months. And here are some areas that maybe you want to look out for. And it sounds to me like just and this could be so wrong too, but my sense is that like the parts of the access control model are still being shaped and how that works in different scenarios. And so for me, I'm really interested in creating a system that works in a way that aligns with your roadmap, so that we don't deviate, but is also not, if you guys decide to change something pretty dramatically, it's going to be easy for us to keep up with that. So that's just been like my immediate feedback. And then I obviously have like tons of very specific questions about the project that I'm trying to work on. But I don't need to ask them in this call and like waste everyone else's time hearing about that.
Super helpful. Yeah, it's like you're definitely peeking behind the curtain since you're so early at this point. Like we, hopefully a lot of the confusion about where libraries live and what does what will be a bit more clear when we like officially launch the Clay DevNet, where at that point we'll have like repos migrated, because there's stuff that lives in 3box today that is going to live in Ceramic, that we just like made it for 3box and then we keep like abstracting that and pulling things into Ceramic. And so 3box will be super, super light and will basically just, you know, be a way to maybe manage OrbitDB instances and attach them to your collection or something, like super light. And most of the functionality will live in Ceramic, and there's probably going to be a layer in between that's called Ceramic Studio, kind of like IPFS Shipyard, where you have like Ceramic Core is Ceramic Network, and then the libraries that do things like implement some of the standards. So you have like Ceramic Core, then you have like Ceramic Standards, which are like schema specifications and CIPs for the identity system and things like that. And then you'll probably have like libraries that implement those and make it easy to consume them. And those will probably live in Ceramic Studio. And then you might have 3box like somewhere over here, which might use some of the Ceramic Studio libraries and do something with Orbit. And so there's going to be like a much more defined structure for these things, because like, for example, like IIP is a good spec, but when we implement it, where's that library going to live? Like it shouldn't live in Ceramic Core because it's not Core, but it also shouldn't live in 3box because it's not 3box. So there will be like a community owned repo where a bunch of community projects, whether through Ceramic grants or people want visibility into the libraries they're building that use Ceramic, can live.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And also, just to be clear, I mean, the expectation isn't that this should be like super easy. I'm not like, what the hell, guys? You know, like it's so hard to keep up with documentation that it's totally understandable. These are just things that like, if I could have any wish, this is what I would wish, but like not an expectation by any means. And I figure you have like a gnarly plan like that one. That makes a lot of sense to make those things easy.
The 3box migration and like moving things from 3box into the right place. It's like once you move it, you don't want to move it again. And so we've been like delaying a bit to make sure that it's like, does this live in Core or Studio? Like what's the relationship? Like, you know, we want to just make sure. So probably around the time when we go to the DevNet you know, like the beta DevNet Clay, we'll have those things in the right order.
Totally.
With better documentation.
Nice. And then maybe I can give everyone just like an idea of the type of thing that we're working on, and then you could tell me like, hey, these are the libraries either in Ceramic or in 3Box right now or elsewhere that you should look at. And so then I can start to kind of paint that picture myself. Basically, and I know, Mike, you're probably at this point pretty familiar, the idea that we're working on right now, we call it Streams, but the name will likely change. But the concept is like, we want to create a protocol for individuals and developers to build productivity and work tooling on top of, so that you can build work apps or productivity apps on top of user-owned data. And then obviously users bring their work to your apps, and then you can, and theoretically we want to like recreate Slack and recreate Notion and have a much better thing than like Discord for like chat. And there's a lot of things that we're really excited about. Honestly, the idea came because we really weren't happy with a lot of the work tools, but like switching was a pain in the ass because you have to migrate all your data and all this stuff. It's like, why can't we build work apps on a shared database where the users are in control of that work, and backed up to Filecoin and IPFS and stuff like that. And so it's a challenge because we talk about the importance of users having control and ownership over their data, but I'm not actually convinced yet that that's what people want. Like, or I'm not completely understanding yet what that means in this context. For me, like, if I could record every single Zoom video that I've ever had, I don't want that on my machine, right? Like, I want that hosted somewhere else for me. So I need to give up some level of custody to make that happen. But certain bits and pieces of work, like I might want pinged on my machine or on Filecoin for long-term storage, stuff of that nature. And so we basically want to start with the most custodial solution that we can to provide, like, no one would even really know that we're using decentralized identifiers or threads or like any sort of like decentralized protocols under the hood, just to start. And then we want to hear the complaints. Like, we want to hear why people are pissed about that. Like, do they want to be the ones signing consent messages and that's it, but they still want their data living elsewhere? Do they actually want all the work and running a Filecoin node or like a full daemon on their machine that covers all of this? Those are the things that I just don't know. And people probably have a ton of differing opinions. And just like anything else, I think decentralization is a spectrum. It's not like completely binary. And so over time, we want to offer different levels of decentralization. But for me, I'm really sick of the experience for a lot of the Web3 apps. And I think we can introduce some of the really cool benefits of like self-custody data or data that's tied to the users instead of the applications. So our backend is like, even if it's fully custodian or custodied, the model of like data belongs to the user and not the app. That's what we want to employ from the start. And I think we can show a lot of really cool benefits from that without even offering, and timeline, I'm talking about like the next 6 weeks, the 6 or 8 or 12 weeks after that, we could be looking at like bring your own DIDs to this, or claim your DID and let's sign consent messages together, or run your own textile thread and link that with your MetaMask. Like, I don't really know. So I guess I'm like, this is a very verbose description at this point, but I'm wondering, what are the libraries that I should be looking at now to form this type of architecture in a way that, one, sets ourselves up to be in alignment with the Ceramic roadmap, so that as y'all change, we're like doing the same things, but also is future-proof enough where the system today we can just plug in a new option, which is like bring your own DID, or different levels of decentralization over time as we learn more.
Yeah, let Joel go.
Okay, so we're actually started working on a new piece that will be kind of the main user model in Ceramic. It's called JSDID. And JSDID is basically a very thin library for interacting with any type of DID in principle. So basically you can authenticate, and then you can do like low level operations such as like sign a JWS, or sign in the future like sign CWS, like that's the CBOR or COSE encoded web tokens, and also do like decryption of web tokens. And basically why we're doing that is basically, or what we're doing, or like how the JSD library communicates with like a wallet is through something we're calling the DID provider. So the DID provider is like very similar to, or it's a JSON RPC. So it's very similar to like the Ethereum JSON RPC, or in 3box, we right now have the 3ID provider, but we want to kind of generalize that to be more minimal and also more kind of generic to any DID. And I think for the kind of thing you're doing, where you kind of custodying a bunch of users' DIDs, you could potentially like have the other side of that JSON RPC live on your server, and then the JSDID library just like uses that, and you can communicate through that. And then like the implementation of the wallet. So that's like each user, when they like sign in, they like authenticate through that library.
Right. So we like run our own DID provider and JSDID as like a consent manager, as a separate microservice that then acts as MetaMask or something of the sort for users that we're custodying.
Yeah, exactly. So JSDID is the client-side library, but the DID provider would be like it calls the DID provider to do the things it needs, and Ceramic will just consume like a JSDID instance to like do the things it needs to do. So yeah, like a microservice that provides the DID provider interface to a user, and like allow them to like click yes and stuff for like consent. That seems like what you want to do.
Yeah, something along those lines. And there is a lot of, I mean, relatively a lot of flexibility within Web2 experiences, right? Like we could do email auth, we could do GitHub auth. Like an idea that I had was essentially like create a DID for a user and allow them to auth with GitHub. So create a verification for them so that their DID is linked to a GitHub. And then if you could query by GitHub verification, then you could essentially, a user could then basically say, hey, like this DID is mine because look at my GitHub verification. And now we can basically prove that, hey, this user is this user, or could own this DID without owning the private keys, just because they're able to re-verify the GitHub proof. And then kind of go from there, and that as like that claiming process. But yeah, there's just a lot of open questions on that process, and I'll look at the DID provider and the JSDID to see what happens there. But yeah, I mean the simplest like way to describe it is that we just don't want users to have to care about their keys to start. And this actually this is just a mindset thing for me, is that like I don't, and again, I'm talking like personally, I'm not trying to like generalize a population, but like personally, I don't care about my data being custodied by someone as long as there's a checks and balance system. So like, as long as I can see who has access to my data on Ethereum or through one of these docs, I'm cool with just checking that every now and again and making sure I know who these parties are, and have the ability to revoke at any time, so that if it does get out, I say, oh, hell no, like I don't, like someone just sold my data, like give me that back. I don't really care about being asked every time over and over for permission and consent on these various things, because like a lot of the brands that I used have established trust. Like for 3box even, I would trust you all because you've showed so much care over user-owned data. I'd be like, okay, like I trust you. You hold it now. And another like promise of like user-owned data too is that you don't want to lose your data, right? Like that's a big value prop for this ecosystem, I think, as well. And like IPFS and Filecoin and stuff like that. But you lose your key, like you lost your data. So like there's that side of things too, which is like it's actually kind of nice to have a backup service for various things, or almost like we were thinking about building a 2-factor authentication process for DIDs. So let's say you have an auth keychain with multiple signers. If somehow, and I don't know if this is possible because it seems like you might need a blockchain or more of that like DAO owned or like a multi-sig owned DID. But like imagine being able to create like a Google authentication clone that's actually just like a DID, like kind of like a JS DID wrapper that is signing messages, so that we need unanimous support to go through with one of these doc updates with all the signers, so that I sign with my MetaMask and then I also get an email, and that email then does the DID signing somehow with like JWT tokenized links or stuff like that. Like there's a lot of really cool patterns to play with. So that's just kind of the ideas that we're working with now. And like our hope is we just want to build a really good UX around this whole thing.
Yeah. I think it's important to make the distinction also between like data custody as like holding the data in its unencrypted format, and like data custody is like holding it encrypted. Because like if you're holding it encrypted, then you can't really like sell it too much because you can't like do much with it. But you could potentially have like policies that you install through something like proxy re-encryption, where I use something like NuCypher to like re-encrypt or like install a policy that says like, oh, entity A and B can access my data if they request it. And then there's like a proxy re-encryption scheme that allows them to, like, when they make a request to get the data, they can like decrypt it. So then you don't actually need to have the keys like live open when you share it with someone, or when someone wants to get access. So there are like things like that you can do.
Yeah, that sounds really cool too. I'm excited to talk more. Like I feel like a lot of people on this call probably maybe don't care about some of these things. So I'm hesitant to like I could go into this for hours, but like maybe we hold off. I'll do some diligence on the libraries that you shared and then some of these ideas, and then we can pick it back up.
Cool.
Yep. But yeah, I agree in principle to all the things. I think it's like a cool pattern that you might make someone re-verify an account as a way to like prove that you are that. I think that's not something people have explored before. But yeah, I mean, if you have multiple accounts linked, you could just have to verify multiple accounts, right? Like, and that can add more security and guarantee. So yeah, and there's even like a cool thing where, you know, like if you're hosting the data, right, persisting into Filecoin, whatever, but also managing the DIDs, they can reclaim their DID, kind of fire you as the DID manager. But then because in the collections, you're routing to your hosting service, like even if they pull their DID away, they can still trust you to manage their files because they're not going to live on the machine. So there's like many things you can let people pull out. And like pulling out their identity doesn't mean they have to pull all their data off your service too.
Yeah, especially with something like threads, because if we're going to be managing a lot of threads, people probably don't want to manage their threads and have to like parse data in the right way and parse schemas in the right, like stuff like that. So I think that, yeah, there's so many, that's why Ceramic to me is so cool, because of the flexibility. And there's just so many different approaches to the same question that it's going to be really helpful to like run through some of those with you once I have a better understanding of stuff.
Yep. It's also, so Joel mentioned JSDID, and Ceramic will probably consume an instance of that. So like client side, you can also, there'll also be some library that implements the IIP stuff. So it makes it really easy to do operations on IIP linked documents. So like to add a new collection or to add certain things, or that'll be really easy. And so that's probably another one that you don't see today because it doesn't exist. But next sprint, we're going to kick off work on making that. So once IIP is just a bit more fleshed out. So yeah, that's definitely something that you'll probably want to use, but that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, 100%. I was just playing around with making new documents. And that was an area of like confusion for me too, that I realized later on, like, well, there was many things that I did wrong, but I made a DID with my ceramic daemon, obviously like when you spin it up, and then I created a new DID with that DID as the owner. And then I realized, like, then I was like, oh, okay, let me go like query these things on IPFS. Then I was like querying the Genesis DID. So I was all confused because I was like, where's the changes? Then so I got all messed up, but that IIP library will be nice.
Cool, that's good to hear. Question from Josh, are sprint details available? They're not completely. We have published a roadmap. That's the main core ceramic protocol things that we're working on in some sequential order. And as you can see, we're almost at clay testnet. But for some of the other libraries that aren't core ceramic, we don't have that public yet. But it might be something we could think about doing, just like publishing sprint goals somewhere. So definitely a process improvement that we could consider. So we only have like 2 minutes left. Any last questions from anyone?
I had one last question.
Sure.
Yeah, so my use case was I'm planning to store claims as a document on Ceramic, and I guess those claims would be encrypted. How do I go about sharing those claims to other organizations or other DIDs? How do I implement that access control on top of encrypted claims or encrypted data on top of Ceramic? So just a general question, and what are your thoughts on how you guys planning to achieve that?
Yeah. So right now, the Ceramic 3ID DID method should include like a public encryption key. That can be used with a library called Tweet NaCl or TweetSalt to like encrypt and to encrypt to like specific DIDs. We will kind of upgrade that to use a new encryption algorithm that supports something called JSON Web Encryption, so JWE. That's not something that is ready yet though. So if you want to like hack onto something, I would recommend like taking a look at Tweet NaCl. And if you look in the Identity Wallet repo, I think that there's like a class called Keyring that contains like methods for doing like encryption and encryption to specific public keys and stuff like that. You should be able to use that to encrypt and decrypt things both like symmetrically and asymmetrically.
Cool. And access control, yeah, I just wanted to touch about access control. Should specific doc types implement access control, or should it be handled at a much higher level at Ceramic core level?
So right now, probably the easiest way is to kind of implement it on top of a doc type. Exactly how, so the encryption can happen like many different ways inside of the protocol. So depending, like we haven't fully fleshed out exactly how that's going to look like, but you can basically like encrypt stuff within the content of a document, or encrypt stuff like all of the contents of all of the documents, or you could encrypt like even the entire records. So exactly, like it depends on like what kind of threats you're protecting against when you make that decision. And some of those things would need to live like inside of the protocol. If you're just encrypting like the content of the document, then you can just do that on like an abstraction level on top. Or you could also implement that inside of the doc type as well. Yeah.
I'll take it.
And yeah, the encryption stuff in ID wallet uses tweet salt.
Thanks.
Yeah, and feel free to just ask us questions as you're going through the encryption stuff because, yeah, I mean, the design space is pretty wide right now.
Sure.
All right. Any last thoughts, questions? If not, we can wrap up. Nope. Cool. So the next one of these is in 2 weeks. We'll have a community call. And then the following week, in 3 weeks from today, we'll have the next Core Devs call. So hopefully I'll see you on Discord before then. See y'all.
Yes, see you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.